Well, welcome everybody, including two of my godchildren. I'm the ones who are younger than me. I'm very, very happy to see you all. And thanks for joining in. Uh, at the very beginning, or before the beginning, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to preheat the ovens. So that can be happening while we assemble the ingredients and get everything ready. So if you want to go ahead and turn your oven on to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, assuming you are all in Fahrenheit land. The second thing that we're going to do, who have done this with me before, are familiar with this, to show that you're a baker, you take some flour and you put it on your nose. Just like this. Now, last week when we were talking about this, Mark Taylor had a brilliant idea to show that you're an Anglo-Catholic baker. You take some flour and you make a cross on your forehead. So, all right. Now that we've affirmed our identity here, general, this recipe calls for a bunch of dry ingredients and a bunch of wet ingredients. And so it's helpful to have two bowls. As I go along and I measure things, I'm actually going to be doing half of the written recipe. So if you don't have two big bowls like this, don't worry about it too much. If you just have one, use it for the dry ingredients. You can take a normal breakfast-sized cereal bowl if you need to, if you're making half of the recipe the way I'm going to, because it's only going to be less than 2 cups of liquid in the whole thing, so you should be fine. But let's start with the dry ingredients, and I will bring those forward now. We're going to have some white flour. And we're going to have some whole wheat flour, which here in Denmark is known as Grahamsmel. And my son Graham is very happy about that. This is for, they call it that, it's named for Sylvester Graham, who was a 19th century Presbyterian minister and an advocate for whole grain breads and vegetarianism. Very interesting character. He's the one for whom graham crackers are named. So probably more than you wanted to know. You want to have a little bit of salt, and you want to have some baking powder. So I'm just going to take the white bread flour. And I'm going to put 1 cup into the big bowl. There we go. And don't let the white flour get too far away, because this is going to be something you're going to come back to. It's both a measured ingredient and it's sort of your general, get this to the right amount of texture between sticky and dry. So we'll just do that, and yeah. And then you want an equal amount of the whole wheat flour. We used to do the version with whole wheat at Advent and Lent. For the last few years, we have done it all the time because, I don't know, we need to be consistent at something, right? So that's a random thing. We want to take the baking powder, and the recipe calls for 4 teaspoons of the baking powder. which, I don't know if you'll be amused by all the Danish labeling here. This is known as biopulver here in Denmark. That's probably useless information to you, but there it is. So with the half recipe, I'm going to just take just a level teaspoon here. I'm going to put in 2 teaspoons instead of 4. And you don't want it to be heaping teaspoon. You want it to be a flat teaspoon. Go ahead and just you just knock off the top with your finger back into the jar. Since we all have very clean hands these days, even when we're not in the kitchen. So take that and put it away. And then you want a little bit of salt. You don't want too much salt. I'm using this French sea salt because that seems fancy to me, though it's actually just sort of a normal thing you find in grocery stores here. So you want just a little bit of salt. It says 2 teaspoons in the recipe. I'm putting 1 for the half recipe. If you don't put any salt in, the bread kind of tastes like water. It's amazing what a difference it makes in the whole process. So you want to take this and let me just show you where we are here. Just the dry ingredients should mix together pretty easily, but do mix them. And then we'll just set that aside, and then we'll move on to the wet ingredients. Okay? Everybody doing fine? All right, lots of thumbs up. Excellent. So just as there were 4 dry ingredients, there are 4 wet ingredients. So in the wet bowl, we have regular old tap water, and you want that to be fairly warm. The water is going to be the first thing in, and you want it to be warm, particularly if you're using honey. Instead of honey, I am using agave syrup with more entertainingly Danish labeling here. The agave syrup is actually just physically in the recipe. It's easier to use than honey because it's more liquidy. And one of the things you want to make sure of when you're dealing with the honey is that it melts into the water. So water's going to be the first thing you put in, and honey's going to be the second thing, honey or agave syrup. So you want to get those ready. And I've got this is a half cup measure that I'm going to use. So the full recipe calls for a cup of water. I'm going to use half a cup. You want it to be fairly hot tap water. So I'm going to put that in. And the second thing you're going to put in is the agave syrup or the honey. If you are using honey, be patient with it in stirring it in. Here, let me just fill up the half cup measure with the honey that comes from cactus. Put that in. So let me show you half as much honey.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, it's either it's a cup if you're using the recipe, or half a cup if you're using the half recipe of the water, and then it's either half a cup or a quarter of a cup if you're using, so you see the nice brown stuff is just going to mix in with the water here. If your water is hot enough and you're using honey, just be patient with it and just take a minute to stir it in. And it's important that it's very integrated, so it's not, you don't look in, you shouldn't be able to see two things. You should be able to see one thing, and it's the honeyed water that's all mixed together. So the third thing we're going to put in is the milk. And you all heard me sounding like a commercial about Oatly before. This is the best oat milk that I have found, and I am told by several people that it is. Adrian affirms this. Yes, thank you. With the big thumbs up. They have a lot of different oat milks here in Denmark, but this is, I believe this one is made in Sweden, and it's just delicious. I have this in my coffee every morning. Oat milk cappuccinos for the win. So it works really, really well in this recipe, and so I'm going to put half a cup of the oat milk in. And if you're using the full recipe, it's a whole cup. So the water and the milk are both full measures, and the honey and the oil are half measures. So after you've got that stirred in, that should mix in pretty easily. This is not one of the more challenging steps. Then you want to take your vegetable oil. I use extra virgin olive oil because it's delicious. And you're going to put a half measure, in my case, a quarter of a cup of the olive oil in. If you're using a full recipe, it'll be half a cup. So I'm dumping that in. And you'll see, to no one's surprise, that the oil and the other liquids don't play that well together. So it'll stay separated. And that's just fine. One of the reasons that we do the dry ingredients first is so that everything is ready to mix together at this moment. And one of the reasons that we have the oil be the last thing that we put into the bread is because it doesn't mix very well, but it'll mix well enough. And the trick to it is it's not as complicated as I am probably making it sound, but just keep mixing it and keep mixing it until the moment you dump it into the big bowl with the dry stuff. So it'll be as mixed as it can be. It's like all of us in our lives. We just do the best we can, even though some things are sort of impossible. And just go ahead and dump the whole thing in. And now, all of a sudden, you're just using one bowl. So everything should be in the bowl where you put the dry ingredients first down. So this will take a little bit of patience. You want to stir it in. At first, it's going to be kind of wet. This is a temporary situation. It's going to be wet like a pancake batter, but we're going to fix that with more of the white flour. Just clean up my surface here. We're going to be dumping it all out onto the counter in just a moment. So at this point, you just add a little bit of white flour at a time. Jasper's Big Brothers, remember the year that I put too much flour into the bread, and I was known for a year as the man who puts too much flour into the communion bread, which is a title I earned, and I still feel proud of to this day. But don't do what I did that year. Just add a little bit at a time, and this is where the online component is maybe a little challenging because it's hard to a point where it's not too sticky to handle. So the little stages of evolution that we have here, stir in enough of the flour, putting in a little at a time until it feels like stirring it with a spoon doesn't help much anymore. I've got a thing that said the host muted me, but I think I'm back. Natalie, what did we miss?
Thanks, sorry. It was
okay.
Yeah. Good
so, anyway, what I think I was saying silently in pantomime is you want the dough to be not too sticky, and you want to have the consistency where the spoon actually becomes useless, and you have to take the spoon out and start working it with your fingers, and just kind of feel your way through it. I hope it'll become obvious when you hit that point. So as soon as it's dry enough, you don't really need the spoon, and you're just using your hands, just push some more flour with your fingertips into it until it becomes, one homogeneous lump of dough that you can work with your hands, like this. So as soon as you get to this point, go ahead and take it out of the bowl and put it on the counter. And then you're just going to knead the dough with the palms of your hands. Have enough flour on your hands so that it doesn't stick to you. And it should be less sticky now anyway. So just fold it toward you. Make it thicker by folding it into halves or fourths. And then you push it out again until it's flat again. And that's how you work the dough. You do that a couple of times. And as you do that, the dough will get slightly stickier again. And just take a little flour and just rub it in like you're giving the bread a flour massage. The bread loves this, by the way. So once you've gotten it so it's a nice consistent dough and it's very easy to handle and it's not sticky at all, you want to take your rolling pin. They have tiny rolling pins here in Europe because they don't have things like Texas and Montana to put all the big things in. So is everybody at the stage where you've got it so that it looks like we're still kneading the dough in some cases, and that's just fine? Yeah, feel free to push it around, work a lot of flour into it so it becomes easy to handle. And I'm gonna give you a minute to do that because I don't want to get ahead because that seems undemocratic. I'm sorry.
Oh, no,
Um,
you're fine. It was just, we're timid, first timers. So,
you guys are doing great. So yeah, this is not it's not a yeast bread, so you don't have to knead it quite as much as you would a yeast bread. With yeast bread, you're trying to stimulate the yeast. And when my mother used to bake bread, um, she would she'd work the bread for a good 5-10 minutes, and like she'd get in a fight with it, and which was very good therapy for her and for me in the succeeding years. So so baking is good for your soul, uh, as well as your stomach. Okay. Emily and Chloe, looking good. That looks really good. Yeah, just work enough flour into it so you can handle it easily. But once you get to that stage, it's really fine to just knead it a little bit, and then you're okay. Natalie and Megan, how you doing over there?
it's the blob. It feels like working with the blob.
It is. It is a blob. Um,
Yeah.
Flour, it can be a tame blob. It can be your pet blob.
Yeah.
But yes, it goes through a blob phase, that's for sure.
All right, we're adding more flour. You're good. Carry on.
All right. Are people comfortable with where their blob is? Okay. When you get it to the stage where you do have enough flour worked into it, you just want to take the rolling pin and just roll it out. It'll naturally stay about 1/2 inch thick, which is about what you want. But basically, you just want a wide, smooth surface so that you can cut the shapes out of the dough and make a nice round communion bread loaf. So it'll rise a little bit when it bakes. So if it's a little flatter than what you're used to seeing in communion bread, don't worry about that. That's a normal part of the process. Well, what you want to do now, after you've got it rolled out, is just take a bowl, take a breakfast cereal bowl, just a medium-sized bowl, and you're just going to turn it upside down on top of the flour, and you're going to push and kind of rotate it around like you're driving a small bus. So it cuts down through. So you're basically using the bowl like a cookie cutter. And what that should give you is a nice round loaf like this. You can do that with the rest of the dough also. If you are making a smaller loaf, a coffee cup is a really good way to cut a smaller loaf. So in the best of times when we are worshiping together in person, and there's a daily mass or just anything that happens in the chapel, there's going to be a Eucharist with just a few people. The coffee cup size loaves are great for the daily masses, so I'll make a couple of those too. Just set them aside. And then there will always be some leftover dough that you just knead together again. Basically, you start the whole process from that step where you just are kneading the dough and then rolling it out again. And it's fine if you're making this for your home, which all of us are at this point. You don't have to have the last part of the dough perfectly shaped as as communion bread. Just flatten it, make a rough loaf. Rustic is in fashion this year. But with the round loaves, the next thing you're going to do, and this is definitely the children over the age of 20 want to handle this part. You want to take either a sharp knife or a pastry cutter or something like that, and just very lightly across the top, you want to make a little score in the top. You're not cutting the bread in half. You're just making a line across the top of the surface very lightly. So you make one line right down the middle of the circle, and then you try to make an exact right angle so that you make a cross. And it should look about like this. And once you've done that, just put them on the cookie sheet. So feel free to cut all your crosses. Try to make it as close to a right angle as possible, because we don't want it to look just like an X. I mean, X's are cool, don't get me wrong, but we're going for a certain amount of religious imagery here, as you may have guessed. So go ahead and take those, just put them onto a cookie sheet, and we're getting close to being done here, at least as far as the bit about assembling these things. The other thing to do is wait for them to bake, which I don't know if we'll do that live here or not. Depends on how many questions they are and how far the discussion takes us.
So for you adults on the call, who
Uh-huh.
want to bake at home, I found that a straight razor is really excellent for cutting straight, easy lines, because
Yeah.
big knives sometimes get stuck and you get jagged edges and stuff. So, if you end up being on the rota to bake bread when we get all back together, that's a good idea.
So thank you. So very lightly. So you make one line right down the middle of the circle, and then you try to make an exact right angle so that you make a cross. And it should look about like this. And once you've done that, just put them on the cookie sheet. So feel free to cut all your crosses. Try to make it as close to a right angle as possible, because we don't want it to look just like an X. I mean, X's are cool, don't get me wrong, but we're going for a certain amount of religious imagery here, as you may have guessed. So go ahead and take those, just put them onto a cookie sheet, and we're getting close to being done here, at least as far as the bit about assembling these things. The other thing to do is wait for them to bake, which I don't know if we'll do that live here or not. Depends on how many questions they are and how far the discussion takes us.
So for you adults on the call,
Uh-huh.
who want to bake at home, I found that a straight razor is really excellent for cutting straight, easy lines. Because
Yeah.
big knives sometimes get stuck and you get jagged edges and stuff. So, if you end up being on the rota to bake bread when we get all back together, that's a good idea.
Suggestion, Sarah. Thank you. So,
How?
those are different.
Okay.
I check it after about 15 minutes. Sometimes it's not done until 20 minutes later. But I set the initial timer for 15 minutes. Carol Wiesenbach, do you have other advice as the mother of all the flower children?
The one, I use the convection feature on my oven, and I know other people don't, so mine cooks faster.
Okay, that's another good piece of advice, because some of you will have that feature in your oven. So I just slid mine in, and I am setting a timer. I'm going to set mine for 13 minutes just in case, to be kind of cautious about things. But yeah, as with any good cooking show, we have a finished product here. This is what, well, you all know what communion bread looks like if you have been to church. And I need to mute something on my end. Sorry about that. So yeah, here we have the finished loaves, and that should be you guys, what you're seeing in your kitchen in about 15 minutes or so, or maybe less. So how's it going?
We had a little bit of we had to kind of redo our dough a little bit. So we're, I think, behind everybody else. But we're good. We're good now.
Yeah. So at what point are you now, Natalie and Megan?
We're scoring our loaves, and then we've got to redo the leftover dough to finish it out. But yeah.
Oh, okay.
We're nearing the time to put it on. Do you grease your pan or put parchment paper down?
Some people do parchment paper. There's enough oil in this recipe that you really don't need to.
Cool.
If you just put it, that's a great question. If you just put it on the baking sheet, yeah, it won't stick. It'll come up just fine.
Okay. Awesome.
That is a very good question. You want it to be at 400 degrees. It's helpful to preheat it.
Yeah.
And Adrian has pointed out that there is Oatly ice cream now, so this ties in perfectly with with both Bread Baking Day and, as Steve and Wendell were pointing out earlier, National Ice Cream Day. Well, you're very welcome, and thank you for being here. And this is a pretty easy bread recipe, as bread recipes go. For those of you who don't usually bake bread, it can be used for a lot of things. As long as I used to tease Father Rob about not getting too close to the bread that we were going to have for dinner, because he might accidentally consecrate it and then it would just throw everything off. So yeah, if you have priests in your home, be very careful, because then the rules just change all of a sudden. The thing about well, this recipe anyway, if you're storing it, if you're not going to eat it right away, you can actually, or if you're not going to eat all of it right away, what I'd recommend is that you just don't bake it all. Bake just what you're going to eat right away. And if you take the remaining dough and you put it into a sealed container and put it in the refrigerator, it'll keep really well for several days. And that way, there's something nice about just having some bread dough around, and you can just take a handful and throw it into the oven, and you can bake bread several days in a row without all of the work that went into the first batch. So that's what I'd recommend for storage. Take care, Jen. It's nice to see you.